depression, the likes of which you've never seen.
But the defund the police idea, I cannot for the life of me grasp how
you mentioned it.
Time, it's for real.
Now to the race for the White House, and after decades of very publicly flirting with the idea, billionaire Donald Trump says he really is running for president this time around.
Donald Trump is running for president.
This phrase is not from any movie I, nor my colleagues can remember.
Do your own research. Don't take my word for it. Look it up yourself, and you will find the truth behind what Joe Biden has not done for our community and the truth as to what Donald Trump has done for our community.
We're talking about basement Biden, right? What is his agenda? Has he really even told us what his agenda is?
Remember, this Congress started off with the Democrats saying we should abolish ICE. It then moved to we should abolish the entire Department of Homeland Security.
We have to go to the polls on November 3rd, and the rest you know what to do. You know what to do. We are one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. We will make America great again.
Welcome to Team Trump Online.
Thank you for watching War Room Weekly.
And it turns out that Donald Trump's campaign platform was the prescription for the American worker.
He is quite clearly the leader to return us to that stature.
Tim, clearly Joe Biden has lost touch with reality.
Thank you all for joining us. Have a good night. Hello and welcome to another edition of Team Trump Online's War Room Weekly, where we take a closer look at President Trump's excellent record of achievement on behalf of the American people and contrast that with Joe Biden's record of failure and his terrible ideas for the future. I'm Tim Murtaugh, the communications director of the Trump 2020 campaign, and we are pleased today to be joined by two great guests. First, the former governor of the great state of Wisconsin, Scott Walker. Governor, good to see you.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
And also David Harris Jr., best-selling author and an advisory board member of Black Voices for Trump here on the campaign. David, good to be with you as well.
Amazing to be here with you guys. Thank you, Tim. Nice to meet you, Governor.
Good to be with you, too.
We're going to talk today about what's going on in the country, and we've seen a lot of it. These protesters, people aligned with the left, and of course these are people who would more naturally be in Joe Biden's camp than anywhere else, toppling statues left and right, going through the whole list of people from the past, starting with Christopher Columbus, I guess, chronologically perhaps, and all the way up to and including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln. Let's just real quick get an overview of what the situation has been, and then we'll talk about it.
The monument wars are rapidly expanding. In one community after another, statues of Christopher Columbus have come under fire. He's a hero to many.
So he's an Italian immigrant, okay?
But he's telling you
this here represents something to me, my Italian history.
But to others,
oversaw the genocide of 3 million people. Nobody talks about that, we don't discuss, that's not told in history.
Whoa! In New Mexico, violence broke out over the removal of monuments to a Spanish conquistador who brutalized Native Americans.
It's a monument to hatred. It's a monument to white supremacy.
In California, statues of a Spanish missionary were toppled. So was one to Union General and U.S. President Ulysses Grant, who led the fight to defeat the Confederacy, but owned a slave for about a year. And to Francis Scott Key, who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. He also enslaved people.
Do we think slave owners should have statues?
But so did Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, whose statues have also been attacked. It has all raised a fierce debate over who deserves public honors, and words of caution from historians such as Douglas Brinkley.
We don't want to be like the old Soviet Union, ripping down every monument to put new ones up for a new regime. We just need to have the monumentization of America reflect true American history, not just white male superiority history.
So there we see, that's a pretty good overview of what's been happening around the country, people going after statues that today they disagree with. And I think there's just the lawlessness and the people who are just tearing down things in public squares that they don't like goes really hand in hand with the defund the police movement that we've also seen moving across the country. And again, these are people who are you would think would be politically aligned with Joe Biden. And he has yet to say a word about any of these things that have been happening. Governor Walker, let's start with you. When you see these images and you see this ongoing thing where people are trying to erase history, really, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's really sad, and I want to make sure the media is talking about the difference between protesters and people who are rioting. They're criminals. If you're burning down small businesses, if you're tearing down monuments, if you're assaulting people, you're not a protester, you're a criminal. And that's the real difference here. Do we want reform in the police? Absolutely. The president's talked about this. Tim Scott tried to push this. Senate Democrats blocked that. We need to do real reforms. But defunding the police would be a horrible thing. And I'm so glad this president's talking about law and order, because Joe Biden seems to be headed deeper into his basement every time this comes up to get away from an issue that overwhelmingly Americans want law and order as well as reform.
Yeah, Governor, that's excellent points there. And David Harris Jr., when you the crowds that are just deciding that they can veto anything that is they find objectionable, and as they say in the cancel culture, when you see these statues coming down, what first comes to mind for you?
Well, it makes me feel that these rioters, these criminals, these protesters that all spawned supposedly out of the death of George Floyd really have nothing whatsoever to do with George Floyd or justice for George Floyd. As the governor said, these individuals are criminals, and I believe that they're very well organized. I think that the American people are waking up to understand and recognize that this just was not some organic growing movement of people that happened to all go all over the country and start toppling these statues. But I think if you follow the money, there's money behind it. I think there's Soros behind it. There's a movement to try to push and create anarchy in our country, in our streets, and it's anti-American. So it is sad, but it's also infuriating. Why are these governors, why are these mayors not allowing their police to do their job? Can you imagine any conservatives going around the country and vandalizing property, destroying property, monuments, for whatever the reason? That's not how we should act, and that's not what any elected officials should allow to take place in their city. So I think Americans, hopefully, even Democrats and a lot of independents that may once have supported the individuals that they put in office, I hope they're waking up to see that these politicians really do not care whatsoever about law and order. They're allowing these individuals to be criminals. And I think that if a chaos ensues and continues to ensue, they'll hope that they can pin that on the president. And it's truly disgusting and infuriating.
Yeah, and it's very similar to what's happening in Seattle that we've seen over there, the CHOP or the Chaz or whatever they're calling it these days. And the mayor of Seattle, Jenny Durkan, who is a Joe Biden endorser, is just permitting it. And, now we know that there's been a homicide in there. And this was previously a place that she said that they were going to enjoy a summer of love.
Yeah.
And it was like a festival or a block party. And that's not like any festival or block party I'd want to go to or take my family to. That's for sure.
Definitely not.
But you're saying, these protesters, we have to take them at their word. And when they pull these statues down and they have grievances with what the people depicted in the statues were like in real life, but they're even coming after the great emancipator, former President Abraham Lincoln. Let's take a look at that one.
Demonstrators are calling for the removal of the Emancipation Memorial in Lincoln Park. The statue shows former President Abraham Lincoln holding the Emancipation Proclamation while standing over a freed slave. D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton plans to introduce legislation to have the statue removed.
Video that we've seen on social media, it appears that some chemical irritants were fired, and we do know that some people were arrested, though we do not have an exact count on that. We can also tell you that about 3 miles away from here at Lincoln Park, U.S. Park Police say that there were some people, about 4 people near the Emancipation statue. That has also been recently one of the flashpoints. They say that they started a fire at the base of the statue, and the suspects fled the scene. 3 individuals were arrested. One is still, they're still looking for that person. As far as the number of arrests here last night, we'll get a count on that later today, but we cannot tell you at this point who basically is in charge of the operation.
Well, it used to be safe to be able to say that Abraham Lincoln was a good guy, but I guess not so anymore. David, we all, the three of us here, we're all members of the party of Lincoln, the Republican Party, and it seems that the mob is coming for Abraham Lincoln. What do you think?
It's absolutely ludicrous. I mean, here we've got the president that was championed the freedom for all people, for the Black community in this country, and signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which was historic for our country. Almost every country in the world has had to battle and deal with slavery. It's how those countries have handled it and treated it and how long it actually existed that I think speaks volumes. Abraham Lincoln said, "That's enough. Not on my watch. All men are created equal." And that we are endowed with inalienable rights by God, our creator, and government's supposed to protect that. So I think that this also points to the fact that so many people out there, because there's people that are stuck in the middle. I really feel like there's good, average, everyday Americans that hear this whole Black Lives Matter movement that think, oh, we need to coddle to Black people because they've had such a hard time in this country. Hogwash. It's total BS. I've been a business owner since I was 20 years old. I've been extremely successful, and I had to put my shoes on one at a time, just like everybody else, and nobody stopped me from doing anything because of my race. So to think that for the average Americans out there that are feeling like they're getting sucked into this entire movement over this should hopefully wake them up as well, because you're going after the guy that actually leveled the playing field for all Americans and is championed with, starting the first civil rights movement in our country. And any individual that would want to topple that statue or desecrate that statue they're anti-Black, in my opinion. They're anti-civil rights. They're anti anything that is pro-Black or pro-American. And it's disgusting to me, yet again, it's happening. It's crazy right now what we're seeing and living through.
Governor Walker, you've been a leader for a long time, not just in Wisconsin, but nationally, and been in elected office, of course. Wouldn't you think at a certain point that a guy who wants to be president of the United States, in Joe Biden, would at some point have to come out and say something about how, hey, guys, maybe we shouldn't just be tearing down all these things? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, ignorance is dangerous, but Joe Biden doesn't want this to happen. He wants to continue to create chaos and animosity. He wants to have division, sow the seeds of division, as was mentioned. I mean, I'm just down the way here in Wisconsin from where the party originally started in Ripon, Wisconsin. 1854, a group of anti-slave activists got together and said, we need to have a party. We're going to call it the Republican Party. First convention was held across the way over in Michigan. And ever since then, with Lincoln being the first president, a week and a half ago, we celebrated Juneteenth Day. That is the last day of which the last state, the slaves in the last state, heard about Lincoln's proclamation, making all the slaves free. And then he didn't take it just there. He went to the 13th Amendment to codify it in the United States Constitution. Joe Biden doesn't want to have a discussion about history because he knows his party and his own history is tainted when it comes to racial issues. The Democrats were the ones who fought desegregated. They were the biased ones. They were the ones early on supporting the Confederacy and these statutes and all the other things. And you look even back to the 1970s, when Joe Biden, in his first term as a United States Senator, not just as a kid in college, spoke out and joined with Southern Democrats who opposed the desegregation of schools. He stood in the way and actually introduced a bill that blocked busing, the very thing that Senator Harris talked about in the debates the media doesn't want to talk about anymore. His record is tainted, just as the Democrat Party is. Republicans were the parties who freed the slaves and continue to stand up for equal opportunity for everyone today.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden really has a terrible record of divisive rhetoric, but also really bad and damaging legislation. And I know we could go on at length about this, but the 1994 crime bill is another, which led to mass incarceration of young Black men in every community across this country. And so for Biden now today as being somehow campaigning as a supposed great healer is a joke. And especially because we see these mobs all across the country now who are, again, politically aligned with Joe Biden and the left fringe of his party. And he stands by and says nothing. That's not leadership. And, it doesn't just stop there. Governor Walker, in your home state of Wisconsin, we saw an ugly scene just the other day where a Democrat, an openly gay Democrat, State Senator Tim Carpenter, was attacked by the mob. Let's take a look at that.
Disturbing violence at the Wisconsin State Capitol. Protesters threw a Molotov cocktail. They ripped down statues, and that Democratic state senator says he was brutally beaten just for taking pictures of the protest on his cell phone. Democratic State Senator Tim Carpenter says he was taking this video of protesters on his cell phone when the video appears to show people rush up to him and tell him to stop recording. It sounds as if the state senator tells the people to leave his phone alone before the video cuts off, and apparently before he was beaten.
So, Governor Walker, that was there in your own state, and it seems to me that this is further evidence that these people who are out destroying public property, knocking down statues, and attacking people that they perceive disagree with them, they don't even realize what and who it is that they're going after.
Well, it's exactly right. As I said before, if you're assaulting people, if you're tearing down statues, if you're burning small businesses, you are no longer protesters. You are criminals. These people are rioting, and they're fanning the flames of discontent. And the fact of the matter is, silence is complicit. I saw those signs in the protests. The irony is, our president, Donald Trump, our vice president, Mike Pence, Republicans across the board have not only spoke out. You look at Tim Scott and the Republicans in the United States Senate have put together a comprehensive package to reform law enforcement and the criminal justice system in this country. The president already led when it came to criminal justice reform even before that. Joe Biden and the Democrats, they're silent. And when you have things like this, I believe here in Wisconsin, a battleground state, and elsewhere across the country, that people, particularly swing voters, are going to look at this and say, where were you? Republicans spoke out and said what happened to George Floyd is inexcusable. It must not ever happen again in America. But also the assaults, the rioting, the abuse, the tearing down of small businesses, particularly in areas in our country that are already facing economic challenges. Enough is enough. We need leaders to stand up. Only Donald Trump has done that. Joe Biden, again, somewhere buried in his basement.
Yeah, and David, I think that what we just saw there with State Senator Carpenter in Wisconsin is proof of what a lot of people have observed, is that when a movement like this, like defund the police or the tearing down of the statues, when that gets started, there really is no stopping it, and they never will be satisfied, and they really don't care who they steamroll over. Like in this case, an openly gay Democrat state senator in Wisconsin was a victim of their assault. So, I mean, your thoughts on that? That a mob of this sort can never really be appeased.
No, they can't be appeased. There's never enough, because I don't even think they know what they want. They just want total anarchy in the streets. But I think they did know exactly who they were targeting based on what we've seen continually by the mainstream media. The targets are white men. They didn't know he was gay, but he fit the description. He's a white male, and he's videotaping. And so many times, how many times on CNN, MSNBC, I've heard Don Lemon say it. I've heard so many news pundits, I call them whack jobs because they really just don't care about the truth. They say it's all about, it's anti-white man, that it's the white man in this country that is the problem. They've been pushing and they've been filling the coffers and the minds and hearts of individuals that are confused, that don't actually know the truth, and then get sucked in emotionally into this entire, spectrum of we need justice for all people, and the white man is the target. So that's just further proof. And if anybody gets in their way, they're going to get steamrolled just like that. And my question again is, as the governor said, where is Joe Biden? How come he hasn't come out and said anything? How come he hasn't publicly denounced the rioting, the criminal assaults? Why hasn't he said to people that I'm sure a lot of them are supporters of him, stop doing this? He's not doing it. He's going to stay in his basement, I think, and continue to try to rub two nickels together in the same sentence and hopefully make 10 cents. But he doesn't have the fortitude. He doesn't have the mental capacity. And it's really sad that the DNC is allowing him, and his own family is allowing him to go through this. If he can't stand up in a place in a time of crisis like this right now and actually make a declaration, why in the world would anybody want this guy to be president?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious that he just doesn't have the strength to stand up to the extreme fringe of his party, because he knows that his party is really fractured right now. And in fact, when he goes through these primary elections, the ones that we just saw just earlier this week, he didn't even crack 70% in one. He didn't even crack 60%. Only got in the high 50% range of the vote in a Democrat primary. and he is the presumed nominee. I mean, what a disgraceful showing that is. And so he's not going to stand up to him because he knows that he doesn't have the power to do that. And again, where does this ever stop? And people might say, oh, well, you guys are overreacting. And to that, I would say, well, what do you think is next? Is it too crazy to think that the violence would come after our churches, right? Would that be next? And before anybody says, oh, you guys are overblowing it, let's take a look at this next clip.
But they also recognize that there are forces arrayed against creation, and they vigilantly defend themselves against those. In every society, there are those who seek to destroy. They destroy for the same reason that troubled boys torture dogs or shoot house cats. Inflicting pain makes them feel powerful. We used to call people like that antisocial forces. They still exist, we just pretend they don't. Or worse, we excuse their behavior. We coddle them, we fund them. Wall Street sends the money in the hope that they will be destroyed last. The rest of us just look on confused. We don't really know what's happening. But the destroyers know. They know exactly what's going on. Never in American history have they been more emboldened than they are now. Just this afternoon around lunchtime, an activist called Sean King issued the following demand on Twitter, quote, all murals and stained glass windows of white Jesus and his European mother and their white friends should also come down. They are a gross form of white supremacy, created as tools of oppression, racist propaganda. They should all come down, end quote. Before you dismiss that idea as absurd, the rantings of some crank on social media, keep in mind that Sean King is the most famous Black Lives Matter leader in this country. Black Lives Matter is now more popular than either major political party. So don't be surprised when they come for your church. Why wouldn't they?
So there you have it. David, coming for the churches and stained glass windows next, that is not far-fetched, is it?
No, it's not far-fetched at all, Tim. And when I hear that, as a Christian, as somebody that has a close personal relationship with my Father God, and is also very vocal about that, I hear that as that's a shot over the bow spiritually to all Christians and all believers. And hopefully that's a shot over the bow, a wake-up call to every independent, every Democrat. There's a lot of Democrats that are Christians. There's a lot of independents that are Christians. To me, this is a spiritual battle that we are in right now. And I think that declaration by Sean King and the exact same thing by Hawk Newsom. He's also one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter in New York. He shared something very similar. They're turning everything that has to do with Christianity. They're making it racist, and they're trying to pit us against ourselves. To me, that's the spirit of the Antichrist. I mean, that's exactly what they're doing. They're calling it racism. And hopefully believers out there are feeling a check in their spirit and are saying, you know what, I really need to A, start to pray a lot more than I have been, and B, get very much more active in my spiritual faith than I have before. Get engaged, get in your Bible, read your book, because if you're reading the BIBLE, the basic instructions before leaving Earth, it talks about nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom. It talks about wars and rumors of wars, and it tells exactly what's happening, I believe, to a certain extent right now. And it also gives us the antidote. There's only one person that is the way, truth, and the life, and he's colorless. We that worship God must worship him in spirit and in truth. So for somebody to try to turn this into a white supremacist issue and then literally basically paint a target on churches, believers better wake up and know that and understand their rightful place and take that rightful place.
Yeah, I mean, that's a new one on me, that Jesus is a white supremacist. I had not heard that one before. And, you've got to be thinking that Joe Biden has got to be looking at this and seeing this spring up around the country and hoping that he has to hope that most people look at it and say, oh, well, that's happening in a different city. It's 100 miles away. That doesn't affect me. But Governor Walker, it is very much a possibility that when this sort of thing begins to move at different places around the country, it's out of the cities. It could come out of the cities, and it doesn't have to be a New York or Boston or DC based thing. There in Wisconsin, I mean, folks must be believing that if they're talking about coming after churches, that could mean anywhere.
It could absolutely mean that. Ignorance left unchecked is absolutely dangerous. And for Joe Biden not to speak out, is really his party has been hijacked. For a guy who claimed to be somewhat moderate in the primaries, normally candidates are on the end of their political spectrum. They move into the general election. Joe Biden's gone the opposite way. He's basically, he's outsourced his campaign to the AOCs and Bernie Sanders of the world, and now increasingly to these radicals who are involved in these movements. So when you said the BIBLB, it made me think as a kid, not only of that song, but the song Jesus Loves the Little Children. What did that song say? He loved the children of every race.
Yeah.
No matter what you look like or where you came from,
Yes.
Jesus loves every single one of us. And I just got to believe that just on a personal, not just a political level, on a personal level, people are going to look at it and be so offended to say they're images of Christ that are black and white and Latino and Asian. Every one of us embraces that because we know Christ is who we are. We embody Christ in who we are. And so whether you're a Christian or Jew or Muslim, whatever, I think you look at this and say, they're coming for me next. We got to stand up. And if Joe Biden's not going to speak out, we need to walk away from that party before it's too late.
That's right. And it's even gotten so bad that some of the folks, not all, but some of the folks over at CNN have noticed. Here's a little clip from Chris Cuomo.
In New York, a Teddy Roosevelt statue is set to be removed from the front steps of the Museum of Natural History. In Washington, D.C., Boston, activists are calling for the removal of the emancipation memorials depicting Abraham Lincoln standing over a black man. In recent days, statues of the founding fathers, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, were toppled in Oregon. In San Francisco, protesters tore down a statue of former President Ulysses S. Grant, who led the Union Army during the Civil War. How far is enough? Is there a too far? Is this all more helpful than hurtful in building a more perfect union?
More hurtful than helpful, Chris Cuomo is wondering. And you know, when CNN begins to notice, I think maybe the liberals there have decided this has started to hurt their guy, Joe Biden. So, Governor Walker, what does this whole thing say? And you have Joe Biden saying nothing about any of this. What does this say about the two men who are running for president right now?
Well, it says everything. If you want a leader, you want someone who stands up and tells it like it is, who tells the truth no matter what this group or that group or the media and some source or another might say. The only choice is Donald J. Trump. I mean, Joe Biden not only is hiding, but if you look at his record, this guy has flip-flopped on just about every major issue out there. He was a guy that has always been against the sanctity of life, but at least at one point had the decency to say at least your taxpayers' dollars shouldn't go for that. And throughout this primary process, he's changed. This is a guy who will say just about anything to get elected, or in this case, say nothing in the hope that somehow the media will gloss over his silence. Now more than ever, we need leaders to stand up and say these attacks, these riots, these assaults of people on the street, be it a state senator or anyone else in America, are completely unacceptable. Now is the time to call out things and say, yeah, we need reform. We need to deal with these issues head on, and there's a way to do that. But you don't doing that by tearing down and brutalizing people. Joe Biden's silence, I think it's damning, not just for this election, but I think historically we'll look back and say his silence was a big part of what fueled these problems.
And I think maybe this is how it begins to happen on the left, where finally at CNN, they start to go, well, maybe this isn't so good for old Joe. And so they gently try to say, hey, it might be okay if you said something. But he hasn't yet said anything about this, which means, as the protesters like to say, silence is complicity, right? So,
yep.
David, how do you read this? Just more weakness from Joe Biden or what?
Well, it is. And again, I hate talking about people that have mental issues, and I really truly believe that he's got a mental problem. I think that he is battling dementia. You know, I talk about it on my show weekly, and I have so many people that have messaged me, well-meaning Americans that message me, and they say, early on, I did poke a little bit of fun because it seemed like he was just having a hard time getting two words out, two thoughts out, one thought out really at the same time. He was just getting stuck. And I had so many people message me, and they said, David, they said, I've got a father, I've got a mother, I've got an uncle, I've got somebody close to me in my family that has dementia, and he is showing all the signs of that. And when you poke at him, it hurts. It hurts me. And so I started to take it easy on him. But at the same time, we have to sound the alarm that this guy's battling something mental. He's got a mental issue. He's got his mental fortitude and capacity to process cognitive thinking is not there. So how could he even get out in front of this and say anything? How could he try to do anything at this point other than just be handled, which is what I believe he's doing? I really believe that the Democrats, if they for some reason get him in the White House, whoever his VP pick is will wind up becoming president within within 60 days, 60 to 90 days tops, because he'll have to step down. He can't. He just can't do anything. He can't say anything, and they don't want to put him out on a camera to just talk off the cuff. And he can't even read. He can't get his sentences out. So all of this just shows the true weakness that the Democrat Party is right now, and the fact that Chris Cuomo, is actually asking, is this helpful or is this hurtful? You know, I think that they've realized they've helped build and create this powder keg that's now exploding in all of our faces. And they can't get themselves out of it. Hopefully Americans wake up and realize that the Democrats don't have the answers. They've created the problems. Biden doesn't have any answers. He hardly even has any sentences. And the only person to support right now is the administration that's actually created the biggest, most booming economy, gave us the lowest unemployment across so many different spectrums, from Black to Hispanic to Asian, 75-year low for women. Biggest increases in wages for young people in this country. We've got to go with what's been working, and that has been this president and his administration.
Yeah, when you saw Joe Biden come out earlier this week on Thursday, he was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and he didn't take any reporter questions there at his event. And he was on that day, 85 consecutive days without holding a press conference for Joe Biden. And when he delivered his remarks, it was, of course, by teleprompter. And again, he did not address any of the stuff that's going on around the country with the tearing down the statues and threats against churches and still violence in the streets in many places in this country. But lucky for Americans, we do not have to wonder where President Trump stands on this issue, just like is the case with so many other issues. He tells you exactly what he thinks. Let's hear straight from the president.
We believe the United States of America is the greatest and most righteous nation that has ever existed. We're going to keep it that way. We believe that every citizen has the fundamental right to think, to speak, to live, and pray according to their own conscience. We believe that the beloved heroes of American history should not be torn down by militant mobs, but held up as an example to the world. Now they're after George Washington. I said, what did he do wrong, George Washington? Thomas Jefferson. We stopped them. They were heading toward the Jefferson Memorial. They couldn't care less. I think half of them don't even know who Thomas Jefferson is. How about Ulysses S. Grant? They want the Confederate soldiers, but all of a sudden they go after Grant. But he's the one that defeated the Confederate soldiers. So what's that all about? How about Gandhi? How about Churchill? You know, Churchill, because this is going outside of our country now. No, we'll stop it. Don't worry. Just don't worry about it. 10 years is a long time to spend in prison.
Well, there could not be a greater contrast between the silence of Joe Biden and President Trump forcefully saying that this is not acceptable. David, that's exactly what you want in a leader.
Absolutely. And I was actually there in Phoenix for that speech with the Student Action Committee for Turning Point USA. It was electric in there. I mean, and it was mostly students, but they filled that place. There were thousands. I don't know what the count is, so I won't guess, but it was pretty much packed to the brim. And they had only turned on they'd only made the notice about it, like, I think 10 days prior. So you want to hear, you want to see, and you want proof that even young people understand what's going on and support this president and his policies and his administration. To pack a place that full with such little notice, Biden couldn't do a 100th of that if he had 2 months to plan and prepare. So the president does he absolutely is sharing what we need to focus on. We've got to honor all aspects of our past, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we don't need to erase it. We need to remember it for what it is. And then we need to be able to move forward and not recreate it. But that's exactly the dangerous playing field that we're in, where these liberals are allowing and these Democrats are allowing and these politicians are allowing this to take place in their country, is if you erase it, you can be very well doomed to repeat it. And that's not what we want. We want the strong, clear, decisive leadership of Donald Trump.
And that's the difference, is that President Trump doesn't make you wonder what he thinks. And when Joe Biden goes by and weeks go by and all of this is happening and people see it on their televisions at home and Biden says nothing, the only assumption that anybody could make is that he thinks it's okay or he's afraid to speak up. And Governor Walker, a contrast there, that the differences in leadership, one guy showing leadership, President Trump, and Joe Biden showing weakness.
Really, I mean, the guy not only not speaking out, but trying to cover up. The fact of the matter is that President Trump, not only in standing up for making sure they're not tearing down our statues and our monuments, this is a guy, as I mentioned before, who early on in his administration pushed criminal justice reform, spoke about it passionately at the State of the Union address. Actually had one of the guests there was someone who had an incredible success story of overcoming those challenges out there. This isn't something he's just talking about now. This is something he's done. You look at real reform and what Senator Tim Scott, a Republican, has been working on for years, and Democrats in the Senate blocked. Why? I believe they seem to want to care more about talking point on the campaign trail than actually doing something. Joe Biden and his party want people to ignore the history of their party, a party that has fought, a party that's filled with racists, the party of even the Senator Byrd, the former leader of their United States Senate, was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. These are people that Joe Biden has worked with. He spoke at his funeral. He talked about standing up at a time when there was civility of the past. And the two senators he mentioned, even though the media tried to claim they were Republicans, no, they were Democrats who fought desegregation efforts in the South. This is the party that Joe Biden is aligned with. He is afraid to let people know what's really true in that situation. And he wants to hide from any coverage or scrutiny and just allow the media be complicit in many cases and make his arguments for him, even though they're not accurate. We need to stand up and work hard to make sure that doesn't happen and that Donald J. Trump and Mike Pence get reelected.
Yeah, and the president made a reference to learning from history and knowing what the history was. And I think it's important to look elsewhere and see how similar things like this have played out in other countries. Let's talk about Venezuela for 1 minute here. In Venezuela, a lot of this happened in the early 1990s, a great civil unrest there, and it was the statues that went first. Let's take a look.
I have already lived through this thing when I was living in Venezuela. Statues came down. Chavez didn't want that history displayed. And then he changed the street names. Then came the curriculum. You guys think it can't happen to you? I've heard this so many times. But always be on guard. Never believe something can't happen to you. You need to guard your country and your society or it will be destroyed.
That prescient warning from my next guest went viral, and it's not hard at all to see why. Marxists tore apart Venezuela in the 90s and took it from Latin America's richest and most stable democracy to the poverty-stricken dystopia it is today. Now, Venezuela isn't the only country to see this happen, and let's make sure we're not next. Venezuelan activist Elizabeth Ragliani joins me now. Elizabeth, you made quite a statement in your video. Yes. What is America, especially the American youth that are treating this like this is a carnival, like a social, social justice experiment in their new entertainment? What are they missing?
I don't think they're seeing past what's going to happen next because they're thinking these are just symbols of oppression. But I had a lot of friends that told me, oh, it's just the Confederate statues. And I said, no, it's not going to be just the Confederate statues. Just wait and see.
So that's how it played out in Venezuela. And that's a history lesson from that country. Governor Walker, what's the lesson to take away from this?
Well, we need to remember that this movement is overwhelmingly driven by radicals. Black Lives Matter, the organization, is led by Marxists. Those aren't my words. Those are their words. The organizers themselves are Marxists. They're going far beyond talk about justice for George Floyd. This is an effort to push a socialist society, Marxist-driven out there. We need to stand up and defend freedom for all Americans. I believe Black Lives Matter, but I believe that every American life matters, particularly the unborn, which they don't talk all that about either. And this is one of those issues where we got to stand up and say, we believe in freedom and prosperity for every American. Every American should have that opportunity. Donald J. Trump has been making that happen, as was mentioned. I mean, we had, before this coronavirus pandemic, we had the lowest recorded ever African-American, Hispanic-American, Asian-American, people with disabilities, veterans. There's never been a lower unemployment rate. He got us out of the recession before. He's going to move us forward with the help of you, the American people.
And David, history lessons to draw from this whole spectacle.
Well, the history lesson is that this is not new. This has happened before. And we look at what took place in Venezuela, that was once the wealthiest country in South America, that enjoyed all of the freedoms that they had, that enjoyed the wealth that they had, and then socialism took over. Chavez changed the game, and how many times have we seen the videos of people eating out of garbages, the grocery stores that are empty? And I really feel like, you know, the powers that be, if you will, the deep state. I think it is just the deep state. It's that are colluding with, that are working with these Marxists, as the governor said, and it is the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement that have came out and acknowledged that they are Marxists and that they do want to topple this form of government, and they do want to get President Trump out of office. They're declaring war. And they're declaring war on everything that's made our country great. And hopefully Americans are waking up to that. You know, I don't believe the polls. The polls, you know, I heard even a Fox poll didn't give the president a shot at winning recently. I haven't checked that yet. But
don't bother. It won't tell you anything.
Yeah, they don't tell you anything. Because look at the polls. They didn't give the president a chance, you know, in 2016. And he absolutely destroyed Hillary Clinton. And she didn't have a chance. So I think there's a lot more Americans underneath the radar that are going to come out and support this president because of all the facts that we've listed on this show, on your show, and what this president has done is exactly what we need to get us out of this mess. We need 4 more years of this administration, this president, his leadership, his policies, and we'll be better than okay. We'll be amazing.
All right, well, that's all the time we have today. I want to thank you both very much. David Harris Jr., best-selling author and a member of the Black Voices for Trump Advisory Board. David, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Tim.
And Governor Scott Walker of the great state of Wisconsin, I have no doubt that we will be out to visit you all very soon. Thank you for your time.
Our pleasure. Good to be with you both.
And thank you for watching us at home on Team Trump Online's War Room Weekly. Before we go, I want to remind you to please download the Trump 2020 app. It's available in the App Store right now. Has all kinds of great features. Get the real news straight from the campaign. You can also get involved in the campaign, volunteer, make phone calls from the comfort of your own home. And in doing all those things, you can earn points and trade them in for great prizes, such as a picture of yourself with President Trump. So download the app in the App Store today. Until next week, I'm Tim Murtaugh with the Trump Campaign. Thanks for watching.
We choose truth over facts.
A composite that our sketch artist put together after interviewing Biden event attendees is unveiled.